Good morning to all. I would like to thank Biovision and Hans Herren for allowing me to present my contribution to this very important discussion that is held in New York in the context of the preparation of Rio Plus 20. Let me perhaps begin by emphasizing how important I believe the shift to sustainable food systems is in the context of the Rio Plus 20 process. And I would like to take as departure point the definition of sustainable diets that a number of scientists have approved when they met in Rome at the International Scientific Symposium on Biodiversity and Sustainable Diets in November 2010. The definition they give of sustainable diets is the following. These are diets with low environmental impacts which contribute to food and nutrition security and to healthy lives for present and future generations. Sustainable diets are protective and respectful of biodiversity and ecosystems, culturally acceptable, accessible, economically fair and affordable, nutritionally adequate, safe and healthy, while optimizing natural and human resources. So this definition is interesting because it takes into account in a very holistic perspective the different functions that diets should serve and that food systems should serve. The definition insists on the environmental dimension, the need to move away from dependency on fossil energies in our ways of producing food and towards more efficient uses of natural resources. The definition insists on the economic dimensions, the need to have food systems that are sufficiently remunerative for food producers and at the same time ensure affordable food for poor consumers. And thirdly, the definition insists on the nutrition dimension, the need to have diets that are sufficiently diverse, sufficiently rich in the full range of micronutrients that lead people to lead an active and healthy life. So I believe that this definition of sustainable diets is a very good departure point to define the challenge that we are facing and the objectives that we must pursue. However, in my conversations with governments that resulted in particular from my presentation of the report on agroecology and the right to food to the Human Rights Council in March 2011, I identified at least three major obstacles that we must be aware of in moving towards sustainable food systems. The first obstacle is a cultural obstacle. Many governments, many policymakers see the modernization of agriculture, the development of agriculture in a very monolinear fashion. For them, modernizing agriculture means making agriculture more like industry, with more external inputs, with more mechanization on the farm, and they emphasize that that is the only way to increase food production and to allow the food systems to feed a growing population and for supply to match growing demand. Instead, I believe we must emphasize that there are very different ways of developing agriculture, very different ways of modernizing it and making agriculture able to feed a growing population. But that is certainly one obstacle we have to be aware of, this idea that there is only one path towards improving agricultural systems. A second obstacle that is very important is that the way we measure the productivity of agriculture is very narrow. It is essentially based on labor productivity. And this, of course, introduces a bias in favor of large-scale monocropping schemes. We measure essentially the total output produced per active laborer. And in this way, we encourage ways of producing food that are labor-saving or even labor-expelling in many cases, instead of emphasizing what needs today to be emphasized, which is the resource efficiency of our production systems, our best use of the natural resources available. In other terms, we need a different measure of productivity, not focused on labor productivity alone, but looking at a total factor productivity in agriculture and measuring outputs not just of one single crop, which farming systems seek to produce, but the wide range of outputs that diverse farming systems can produce. For example, when you use cover crops to preserve the soils, you produce biomass that can be used as feedstock and that can regenerate the soils, producing compost. And this kind of output also should matter in our assessment of productivity. A third obstacle that I think is very important is that the market incentives today are not aligned with sustainable development goals. Essentially, many ways of producing food are creating huge social and environmental externalities that are not, in fact, taken into account in the price of food that is put on the markets. And one might say that the markets today reward the most competitive producers, but this competitiveness is a bit biased because it is supported by the subsidization of fossil energies used in producing food, and it is discounting the costs for the future of fossil-based inputs that are used in industrial types of farming. And so we must be aware that without reforming the market structures, without ensuring that the market rewards more sustainable ways of producing food, it will be very difficult to effectuate this shift towards sustainable food systems and to encourage producers to contribute to the fulfillment of sustainable development goals. So how to overcome these obstacles, and how can we ensure that the Rio+20 conference will have a significant impact on the choices we make in the area of food systems and agricultural systems? I think the key is that we must learn the lessons from the failure of the Millennium Development Goals adopted in 2000. There is a large consensus that one reason why the MDGs were not as successful as they should have been is that we failed to emphasize enough the need for accountability of governments in making swift progress towards the MDGs. We know that this is one reason why Rio+20 and the outcome document that is now subject to negotiations puts lots of emphasis on the governance reforms that are required in order to improve accountability. The Commission for Sustainable Development should be transformed into a Council for Sustainable Development. We should adopt sustainable development goals, targets to be achieved, and we should finally adopt a series of indicators on sustainability, including indicators on food security, on sustainable consumption patterns, and on sustainable production. For such indicators to be effective and to really move towards sustainability in national and international policies, we need to build on these indicators and make sure that they influence the way policy choices are made. And I believe that there are three ways to achieve this. First, we need to develop indicators that are precise enough in order to show the direction that governments must espouse to move towards sustainable food systems. For example, we could imagine indicators that measure the increased use of organic fertilizers and the phasing out of fossil energy-based fertilizers in food systems. We could have indicators that measure how agrobiodiversity is preserved and enhanced in the farming methods that are promoted. And these indicators would be extremely useful in indicating the way for governments to move towards sustainable food systems. Secondly, we must ensure that each state shall bind itself towards the fulfillment of certain objectives, certain targets, by adopting certain indicators and by adopting especially action plans that identify for 5, 7, 10 years the set of measures that must be adopted, the speed at which these measures shall be adopted, and the authorities responsible for adopting these measures that shall move us towards more sustainable food systems. The adoption of such action plans should be accompanied by independent monitoring systems that can measure progress made and can sanction governments who are not moving fast enough, who are not delivering upon their commitments, And instead, the governments who are moving towards the implementation of the action plans that they've adopted should be rewarded by this independent monitoring of progress. Independent monitoring means that civil society organizations, that national parliaments should be involved in monitoring this progress on the basis of indicators that are used transparently to ensure that the commitments are followed upon by governments. And thirdly, we need to facilitate this shift towards sustainable food systems, reward governments at international level by very closely tracking progress made at national level by the governments making commitments. I believe that Rio Plus 20 could be very significantly supported by the Committee on World Food Security meeting in Rome. The CFS was reformed, as you know, in November 2009 in order to improve the global governance of food security. And in its current phase of work, the CFS should gradually insist more on the accountability dimension of food security policies. This means in particular that the CFS should gradually be able to seek information from governments as to which measures they are adopting to improve food security and to move to sustainable food systems, and that the CFS could be a platform where this progress is measured and where governments enter into a sort of peer review monitoring of progress made. Scientific experts, NGOs, organizations like Biovision have a very key role in supporting this transition. First, they can contribute to developing adequate indicators that could measure progress towards sustainability. Secondly, they could mobilize, make the case for increased pressure of governments towards implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. And thirdly, they can play a role in monitoring progress in support of national parliaments, in support of the CFS, in order to make sure that we do not lose sight of the objectives that are being pursued. What I'm saying here is that we must have a diagnosis which Rio Plus 20 shall provide. We must have a vision such as the one provided by the International Assessment on Agricultural Sciences and Technologies for Development, adopted in Johannesburg in April 2008. But beyond this diagnosis and beyond this vision, we need a process. We need a way to get there. We need national strategies with independent monitoring of progress to make sure that we do not deviate from these objectives. And for this, Biovision has a very important role to fulfill. I hope these comments and proposals have been useful, and I look forward, of course, to my continued engagement alongside Biovision in this very important discussion preceding Rio Plus 20. Many thanks again for making it possible for me to deliver this address, and I wish you all the best in your work today.